Okay, well, could I start the discussion then by asking, when you were saying that you supported a section of the Venice Commission report, the whole point of the Venice Commission report was to deal with the nuances of a whole load of issues and come up with a balance. So, I mean, really, with regards to the Venice Commission report, you should really accept its entirety, or not accept its entirety, because obviously there will be individual bits that each group will agree with because it's trying to find a balance. So what are your thoughts on the entirety of it, on the general conclusion that incitement to hatred, including religious hatred, should be a crime, that insult to religious feelings should not be a crime, and that the offence of blasphemy should be abolished? On that overall package, what are your thoughts?
Okay, well, what I said I agree with, and I literally just heard it as you for the first time when you said it, was when they tried to say that the purpose was for rational discussion. And I said, well, okay, now let's look at the purpose and see if the measure that they propose fits the purpose. So if you had a society where people were insulting things which are held sacred, which can include their mothers, I would say that people hold their mothers sacred. It doesn't have to be a spiritual being per se or whatever. It can be things which you hold personally sacred. Would that be conducive to rational discussion? Does it serve rational discussion? Is it itself rational discussion? And no, it's not. So I see no rational reason why a society should permit gratuitous insult, provided, of course, that there should be safeguards, of course, to this, which there already are. The courts have to prove intent. I think in one iteration or guidance on the Irish blasphemy law, it was sole intent on one discussion, or as well, one discussion says just intent as part of it. But I'm all for putting a high level of standard, a high level of burden of proof to protect people from the grey areas. But for those who are clearly gratuitously insulting, it should be criminalised like any other form of verbal abuse or other types of abuse which are criminalised in most Western systems.
And when you were saying that, I don't want to dominate the questions, but Joby, you can ask me as well, but when you were saying that people's beliefs are central to them in a way that's more central than, say, their skin colour or their gender, first of all, do you include atheists in that? That atheist beliefs are essential? I
mean, can you read aside your conscience? So obviously, presumably, there are atheists who follow their conscience, and believing in not believing in a God wasn't really a choice for them. They just, for them, how they perceive it anyway.
Yeah, and so what are your thoughts then on sacred scriptures and people from religions saying things? For example, Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor saying that atheists are not fully human, or the Quran having passages about killing unbelievers.
The issue of the Quran, unbelievers, the word kuffar has a number of translations depending on its context. So the actual same word can be used in one paragraph 3 times and have 3 different meanings, depending on how it is referring to. It can refer to farmers, for example, cut those who cover, or it can refer to disbelievers, or it can refer to just being a non-Muslim, or it can refer to those who are actively at war with Muslims or trying to kill Muslims. So I would disagree with anything that says go out and kill people just because they have a different belief. Yeah. But the Quran doesn't say that, and I don't neither the Bible nor the Old Testament to my knowledge. But as for that, what that cardinal said, the cardinal isn't God or isn't a religious scripture in of himself, and if he says that atheists are not fully human, then obviously it could be a case for the courts, yeah.
But let's say so. And I'm accepting what you're saying there, that if I'm saying that there are passages in the Quran, and say those comments by Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor, that in the form in which they are published, we can't see the original Arabic, we just see the English translation that we see. In the form that they are published to us, are deeply offensive to us and to the core of our being. Do you think that in the form that they are published, that it's reasonable that they should be published in that way?
Well, you know what? I think we always conflate offence with intent to insult. I'm not talking about offence. Okay. Offence is vague. It can be, people can say they're offended on different things. I don't really care about offence. I care about intent to insult. I'll give you an example, right? So if you see someone on the street who comes up to you and goes and bites their thumb like this at you, you're not going to be offended or insulted. You think like, what's this person? A bit crazy guy. But in Italy, if you're an Italian person, that's an insult, basically. Or with Greeks, you show your palm up to a person, that's an insult. But it's about the intent. Right? But if you knew, you weren't Italian, but an Italian person came up to you and did that, you knew what that meant, you would take insult from that because you know that was their intent. And when people say no offense intended and you say none taken, that common expression of you are willing to forgive people for that because if they don't intend to offend you, then they're not really disrespecting you or making you lesser than them. It's just how it is.
But how do you determine that intent? Who determines intent? I mean, in the same way as the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists would say very sincerely that they don't intend to insult. What they intend to do is to convey in a provocative way a particular belief about a particular ideology. They're saying they're not intending to. It's as in your example of the Quran isn't intending to insult my beliefs, but I perceive it as insulting my belief. So our difference seems to be in that I'm happy to say that that's my problem. My perception of it is my problem, and you're entitled to publish it. Whereas you seem to be assuming intent, and on the basis of assuming the intent, saying, I don't know what you're saying then, that therefore it should be banned or the intent should be improved.
Well, the intent should be improved. I mean, you've heard of the legal concept of mens rea. Mens rea legal concept, for those who are lawyers or budding lawyers in the audience, is a malice of intent, basically, that you intended to do a crime, maliciously. So mens rea is a legal concept which is used in issues of murder cases and theft and so on and so forth. You have to show there was criminal intent by the individual. So courts do it all the time, and I say, look, put the burden of proof really high, to protect people from the grey areas, so people who you can't be sure. But when it's absolutely clear, so if someone scrawled on the wall somewhere saying that I think Tommy's mum is a woman of ill repute, let's just say, I think it's very clear to say that he wasn't just expressing an artistic perspective, or I'm being provocative to express the inner existence. No, you're not. You're being insulting. And I think it's very clear cut from the manifestation. But I want to ask you a point, which is, do you think that verbal abuse in domestic cases is allowed or should be allowed?
Can you give me an example?
Well, that's the thing, verbal abuse, right? So verbal abuse could be that, let's say, a husband, telling his wife that she's, again, a woman of ill repute, using worse language than that, shall we say, every day having a go at her, putting her down, saying she's worthless, or a whole number of things. I mean, and so I don't need to enumerate points, but do you think that should be allowed as an expression of free speech? I
think it should be a reason for the woman to leave that husband, and I think that if it reaches a stage that it is so oppressive as to be equivalent to physical violence, if it's psychological violence to the extent that it's the equivalent of physical violence, then I think that should be outlawed. Yeah.
So then, would you accept then that psychological harm is a valid harm as well as physical harm?
At a certain degree of the scale. But I don't think that publishing a cartoon generally to the population for people who choose to pick it up and or not pick it up and look at it is the same thing as somebody who is living with somebody and on a continuous daily basis in that enclosed environment, using those oppressive measures.
But then if you say that at a certain time
in other words, there's a scale, yeah. Would you accept that there's a scale and that somewhere on either end that there's extremes and there's a grey area in the middle?
Well, I mean, personally, from the Islamic perspective, even one word of insult to a spouse is wrong and is potentially criminalisable under Islamic law, but you can't insult.
But you can't beat your wife.
You can't gratuitously beat your wife and
not gratuitously, but you can under certain circumstances, according to the Quran.
Well, actually, the Quran is actually okay. Without changing the topic, though, that has to do with how the Quran and family affairs. But no, the Quran doesn't advocate that go forth and beat your wife. No,
but it does create circumstances under which, at the end of the scale of other things,
the Quran
you
creates
can beat your wife.
equal circumstances by which the man can be beaten for being a negligent, abusive husband too, or even just negligent husband. He can be beaten. So
by his wife.
In one case, actually, yes, but a woman can actually go. A woman came to Prophet Muhammad and said that my husband's abusive, so he said I beat him. So one could say it's abusing your husband's there, but
in most cases, beat her husband in Islam.
Depending on what the actions of the husband is, yes. And likewise with, but more importantly, Islam gives the feature of a court. A woman can take a husband to court for being negligent or abusive, and he can receive corporal punishment. But I don't want to digress with Islamic law.
Okay, just one thing before we go off that.
This is about free speech, not about domestic policy.
Although we did then go into the equivalence of psychological depression and violence.
The scale issue, though, because you mentioned the scale issue. If you say it's an issue of a scale, then that by your own definition, that's also unclear, because then at what point in the scale, where do you say one is wrong, one is right, this is too much, too little? I say, well, look, because you yourself, you're arguing that you can't restrict speech if in cases where you say there is not lack of clarity, yet you yourself are advocating a scale which by definition will produce unclear situations.
Of course it will, because life is complex. And where I would draw the line, first of all, in terms of the beating, whether it's a man beating his wife or a wife beating her husband, I don't think either of those should be allowed. When you're into oppressive psychological treatment that it has the same harmful equivalent as physical violence, I think that should be illegal. When you go down the scale and outside of the environment of two people living in the same house and neither being able effectively to escape from the environment, and you go into the public domain, once you go into the public domain, at the far end of the public domain, you have publications that people can choose whether or not they want to read. I think in publications that people can choose whether or not they want to read, that's very much on the liberal end of the spectrum for me, that you can publish whatever you want, and if somebody doesn't want to look at it, they don't look at it. Now, if that publication, however, incites people to harm individual people as opposed to criticising ideas that people have, then I think that's where you start to get into the grey area. Now, how you deal with the grey area is for society to determine, and for society to determine on the basis of a compilation of all of our views, not merely liberals saying you have to do it our way or Muslims saying you have to do it our way. You have to come up with some sort of system that everybody can adhere to, which will involve compromise. Will involve compromise from everybody. And even if you believe that the creator of the universe is telling you that you have to do it this way, sure, then lead your own life on that basis. But you shouldn't insist that others lead their life on the basis of what you believe the creator of the universe is telling you.
Okay, no one's saying that people should follow other people's laws per se. It's just about the issue of the universal issue of human respect. One cannot say, well, look, if you believe in respect, that's just your religion. I don't believe in respect for humans. And it's like, well, no, because you can't live in society without respect informing at some level the law system. But I want to get back to what you mentioned about if the publication does not necessarily have to be bought by everyone. So as long as you can avoid buying it,
I think that if it does incite hatred against people on the basis of any of their attributes, then I think that should be outlawed. I'm not arguing that. I'm saying that. But if there are cartoons that are attacking ideas, ridiculing ideas, satirising ideas, even in an offensive way, I think that should be allowed if it's attacking ideas and ideologies. And the distinction that I would make, and I won't say it about Islam to make it easier for you to appreciate, that if people attack me as an atheist, then I have a problem with that. If people attack the idea of atheism and ridicule the idea of atheism and insult the idea of atheism, I don't have a problem with that. I'm not going to try and get them locked up. I'm not going to try and get them fined, and I'm not going to try and get them killed. You know, and that I think is the distinction. Is the distinction between ideas and people. I think people should be protected from harm. Ideas should be always open to robust criticism, including ridicule, if people want to use ridicule.
No one's arguing that ideas which are disembodied things should be protected from criticism and so on, and even ridicule for the sake of intellectual purposes, for certain. But when it comes to people, to moral exemplars, figures, people they hold dear, people's mothers. These are not they're not ideas. They're people. Whether the mother is alive or dead is not really the question to the individual. But just to ask you a question. So let's say there was a publication that said, let's say that white people's skin color is funny. It's not really necessarily inciting hatred per se. Or let's make it more visceral, because obviously that's people get away with making jibes about white people. So, all right, let's say black people's skin color is funny, or blue people's skin color is funny, or red people, whatever, right? Now, the statement itself doesn't necessarily incite hatred, but it's ridicule and insulting an aspect of a group of people. Would you support that? Would you say that shouldn't be criminalized?
That's a tough one. If somebody says that black people's skin is funny, I think that's just a stupid statement.
Or strange, or of course. But would you support their right to publish this?
I think I'd probably laugh at them for making a statement. I think you probably need to go more into statements that are, that are trying to incite people to dislike black people. If that was the case, I definitely think that it should be outlawed.
Oh, actually, I had another example. There was an infamous sign during the 1960s or 70s where it said, no blacks, no dogs, no Irish, all right, which was very offensive and insulting. Now, that might be, you might say that's inciting hatred perhaps, but what if there was a sign that said that a certain skin colour of people, they just look like monkeys? But not necessarily that you should hate monkeys per se, or monkeys aren't a hated animal per se. But X, Y, and Z skin looks like monkeys. Do you think that should be allowable to be published? And would you support the right of people to publish that statement?
Again, I'm not sure what the statement is. The statement is that people's skin makes them look like a monkey.
Oh yeah, someone made a declaration, maybe as a front cover or something, saying that this or some far right group said. X, Y, and Z people, skin colour, it makes them look like monkeys.
Well, that actually is the example of that happened in France that Charlie Hebdo was satirising, which
a politician, but not a race or a commonly shared identity. I mean, do you think that should be prohibited, or would you support the right of people to publish statements like that? Just not necessarily support the statement, just support the right of people to publish that statement.
Well, I tend to be quite liberal in terms of what people can publish. So I would look at it on the basis of seeing if it is wise to allow it to be published, rather than looking at the basis of I want to censor this. But certainly once, if in my view, once it strays into the realm of inciting hatred, that's where I would draw the line. I'd have to see an actual example to evaluate it.
Okay, I mean, you mentioned, wisdom is something that would be one of the factors that you look into, and that's really precisely what I'm saying in this discussion. You look at the wisdom of something, you look at, will it cause more harm than good? Does it fit with what is the rational purpose of free speech, which is to basically the pursuit of truth or the expression of opinions on values and ideas. And as I said, I mean, just to kind of clarify. So certainly our organisation, as I reiterate for the nth time, I mean, we support open criticism of ideas and beliefs. And I once saw you made a funny comment at the UCD debate about one particular religion whose God came down to earth, died, and then wrote a book about it. Obviously, I personally wouldn't use that statement myself, but I take that as an expression of your opinion. Your intellectual opinion. So I think all of us here, reasonable individuals, and the law mentions that what would a reasonable individual interpret from any of these cases, that I think the law has the appropriate already safeguards, the common sense, and the understanding to distinguish between insult and gross offence, as well as versus intellectual criticism. I think that the people understand this already, and people realise that. And wouldn't you agree that maybe it would be better for a more cohesive society that, you have a free market of ideas, that's great, have all this debate, but wisdom refrain from insult, gratuitous insult, demonization, defamation of people.
Well, I agree, and I mean, I would not only Not only would I refrain from doing that myself, but going back to your earlier example, if people were making those statements, whatever my views, having looked at it about whether they should be entitled to publish it, I would actively campaign against that ideology, and I would actively encourage people not to agree with that type of idea, even if I believe that they should be entitled to publish it, and to a certain extent. Whether I think it should be published or not is neither here nor there, because I might be mistaken. The reason that we have a legal system is to try to move away from the individual biases that we all have. And I would have a bias towards liberalism, other people would have a bias towards conservatism. And ultimately, one of the purposes of the legal system is to try and remove those prejudices and to try and have a set of criteria that can be applied objectively to everybody, irrespective of what their beliefs in.
Well, I think we're agreeing actually quite a lot, because I agree. So just the whole point is, let's put it to the legal system. I don't want to be the arbiter of what's right and wrong. I'm not a judge, and I'm far from it. But to put it to the courts, for them to decide as to what constitutes gross offence, which already is. I mean, England doesn't have a blasphemy law, as you know. We got rid of it not so long ago. Actually, it wasn't very relatively recently. But what the laws which there are, like the Malicious Communications Act, which forbid gross offence, for example, which is part. It's not a religiously inspired law. It's just causing gross offence, or the US law against obscenity as well, which are just things which are about expressions which are not necessarily incitement to violence per se, but they cause psychological harm to people, individuals, to communities, to groups. Would you agree or disagree with those particular laws?
Give me an example.
So the laws against obscenity, for example, in the United States, against fighting words, and in the UK, the law against gross offence.
Well, obscenity is typically used in terms of pornography. I don't have any problem with pornography. I think people should be entitled to look at pornography. I think if the pornography exploits people, I certainly would be opposed to child pornography. I would be opposed to any pornography that involves people being forced into pornography. But I think that the act of having sex is not illegal, and it's pretty strange that it's illegal to portray something that isn't illegal to do. Whereas it is illegal to kill people, yet it's not illegal to have movies that demonstrate people killing people. So in terms of obscenity, I'd be quite liberal. Interestingly enough, there was a study done in terms of downloading of pornography internationally. And in order to try and balance out the fact that different countries have different values, they just focused on 3 types of pornography that are illegal almost everywhere and that are frowned upon almost everywhere, which was child pornography, rape pornography, and bestiality. And the study found that 8 of the 10 countries in which most of the downloads of that type of pornography occurred were Islamic countries. I don't know what to make of that, but that's it seemed quite a disproportionate thing to me, but that was the outcome of that. Can I ask you just one thing before we move off this? Because we were talking about the legal system, and now the other thing in terms of the legal system is that there are very different legal systems in Islamic countries than in secular democracies.
I would dispute the term Islamic country, but...
Okay, well, there are very different legal systems in some countries than in others. Okay. And if I take 2 examples, I'd like to hear your thoughts. And I accept that you probably believe that the people shouldn't have said the things that they've said, but whether you think that the punishments are proportionate. One is the case of Raif Badawi, who's currently... who in fact is a Muslim, who... in Saudi Arabia is currently sentenced to be flogged every week for 20 weeks, although it has been postponed after the first one for a while. But there's now talk of retrying him and possibly him being, possibly a death penalty being sought. The second one is Asia Bibi, who's a Christian woman in Pakistan who was involved in a dispute with co-workers who were Muslims. Was accused of saying something about Jesus having done more for people than Muhammad, and who is currently facing execution for saying that in Pakistan. And 2 politicians in Pakistan, one the governor of Punjab, who is a Muslim, and the other the minorities minister in the Pakistani government, who was a Christian, both of whom spoke up for Asia Bibi and against what they considered to be the disproportionate punishment. Both of them were murdered, one of them by his own bodyguard. And that person, when he was brought to court, had other lawyers throwing rose petals in front of him as he went into court to be tried for murdering his governor. So just in terms of those, like to us in Ireland, and I'm sure to most people in England, those would seem to be disproportionate penalties, even if you accept that it's wrong to blaspheme.
Okay, I mean, before I answer, I just want to make a quick point about the pornography. I would argue, and I think, and some feminists, although mainstream feminists would say it's pornography is the freedom of expression of the sexuality, of the individuality of the woman, or something like this. But some feminists do argue that it creates sexual objectification and is degrading of women, and they want to ban it, they want to oppose it. Certainly in Islam, we'd consider the public portrayal of sex, certainly that kind of, certainly gratuitously, which it's not for a rational reason, it would serve no purpose and would be counterproductive and cause problems for expectations in sex, relationships and so on, but that's a different discussion which we won't entertain today. So I would disagree with the issue of pornography off the bat. But as for Raif Badawi and Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, these are post-colonial constructs. The Pakistani blasphemy law was borrowed from the old Victorian era blasphemy law of England. Right, Pakistan got it from England, so you can blame England, I suppose, for
we
that.
We typically do here.
Yeah. But it is. I'm against the Victorian formulation and understanding of blasphemy. I would like to posit that throughout Islamic civilization, there was books published criticizing Islam, calling the Prophet Muhammad a false prophet by Christians living in the Muslim world, in Antioch, in Syria, in Iraq. St. John of Damascus, Catholic saint. Where is he from? The answer's in the name, Damascus. So these are no one gave a death fatwa against them, saying kill them for whatever, because it was expected that Christians or non-Muslims would hold these opinions, and their expression of them was viewed as intellectual critique and debate. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ set up the first Muslim-Christian debate, was for 3 days in the mosque, and after that, I mean, the Christians rejected him to his face, in essence calling him a false prophet, in a way almost alluding to him being a liar. And what did the Prophet do? He said, well, if you want to pray in the mosque before going back home, you can go. And that was how he dealt with it. And that gave us an example for us to follow as Muslims. So I'm against how Pakistan blasphemy law is used. It's mostly used politically. Certainly there are many factions within Pakistan, and they use it against each other all the time. You had a Salafi guy, it was used against him because he was a Salafi and he wasn't, I think, a Naqshbandi, and there was all these different sectarian groups using it against each other. So I'm against the Pakistani blasphemy law as it's formulated and as it was borrowed from the British. As for Raif Badawi, Saudi Arabia considers the Muslim Brotherhood to be terrorists, and they're a non-violent political group. So I really wouldn't take whatever Saudi Arabia does seriously. I'd take it with a pinch of salt, pepper, and some paprika. All right, so I don't really have any. I'm not an apologist of Saudi Arabia by any means, and I think that Raif Badawi didn't do blasphemy just because he declared himself to be a liberal, or he's a secular liberal. I mean, as for secular liberalism itself, and so that's a different discussion. But I disagree that he was a blasphemer just because he said he's a liberal. So I disagree with that. So that's would be my answer. But I suppose I think in many cases I'm getting the feeling we agree in principle, but it's just our interpretation of what we judge to be falling foul of said principles. All I wanted to say is that humans identify, and would you agree that humans identify with many different kinds of identity? So people might say I'm a black person, or I'm a Jew, I'm a Christian, I heard one feminist say that her gender was her nation, and so on. So these identity groups, which people feel part of, and feel that they actually defines who they are, that they should deserve some protection, not from intellectual criticism at all. No protection. No one should be protected from that. but just protection from gratuitous insult, which would demean them and part of who they are. Would you agree with the basic principle?
Well, I think if you're going into a kind of grey area between where you're saying that a person's identity is close to is so close to their religion, that insulting their religion is insulting them. Is that roughly what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that, according to secular discourse, religion would be just another identity group, like race, like gender, like sexual preference.
Well, I would just say, if people were straying into criticising ideas in such a way as it was also gratuitously insulting people, okay, then I would be opposed to them doing that, and I would challenge them doing that using my own freedom of speech to say I don't think that's a reasonable thing to do, but I don't think that they should be outlawed from saying that, if you follow that distinction.
Why would you make that distinction?
Because if they're attacking ideas, I think they're entitled to attack ideas, even if the ideas insult the religious or non-religious sensitivities of people. But if they were gratuitously insulting the religious or non-religious sensitivities of people, I would be opposed to that personally, but I wouldn't outlaw it. I would just argue against them and say you shouldn't do that.
So do you think then maybe expressions of, let's say, of racism shouldn't be outlawed, but maybe just contested socially or contested?
No, because I make a distinction between racism and religion, because you can change your religion, but you can't change your race.
Well, I don't think you can. I mean, can you really change your conscience? Do you think you could just literally decide right now to believe in God and be a devout?
Well, if you came through the door here, I would go, right, I was mistaken. I mean, I don't have any inherent desire for there to be no God. You know, it's just for me, that's where the evidence has led me, and if I got new evidence that changed my mind, I'd be happy to change my mind.
So you're saying it's outside your control until new evidence comes?
Until new evidence, yeah.
So then it's the same as race, it's the same as...
No, it doesn't matter what evidence you get, unless you're Michael Jackson.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well, actually. Unless you're Michael Jackson, unless you can afford that. Well, would you say then that you can be sexist because people can be transgender, you can change your gender now, apparently?
We've been told we have a minute left. I don't think we're going to sort that out in a minute.
All right, okay. I mean, as I said, one then could argue that because transgender operations allow people to change their gender or decide their gender, now you have this strange, was it cisgender and not, I don't know whether new postmodernist liberal terminology is for this stuff. But now one could argue then, if by your principle maybe, that well, now you can choose your gender, so now sexism is on the table. Now you should decriminalise it because you can choose your gender.
Yeah. Are we summating, by the way, or what are we finishing?
We'll open it up to the floor.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
That's fine.